Chapter 1. The Queen of the Office. Ebele Daniels was a force of nature in her Oakland community. In her late 50s, she had built a successful real estate brokerage from the ground up, commanding her office with the precision of a general and the grace of a queen. She was the top broker in the city, always flashing her signature smile and using her knowledge to win people over or to crush them under her heel. Every Sunday and Wednesday, she attended church, not as a humble servant, but as a ruler, making sure she was in charge of something. Anything. The choir, the women's group, or even the building fund. Nothing happened without her stamp of approval. Her presence dominated the congregation, and no one dared oppose her. At home, her husband Kwame, a contractor with a reputation for being a tough man on the job site, was reduced to a meek, obedient lapdog in her presence. Behind closed doors, he lived in fear of her. In public, he barked at others, but when it came to Ebele, he was silent. Just as he had been for years. The people in the community whispered behind their backs, calling him her lapdog, but he never argued. The truth was too heavy to bear. Their 3 grown children were no better, selfish and spoiled. They lived off the success Ebele had created, feeding off her power. Her eldest son, Ifeshi, ran an online escort business, soliciting women with no remorse or guilt, mimicking the manipulative ways he had learned from his mother.
"Address me as Don the John,"
he called himself. He had the same coldness in his eyes and treated his employees, especially his secretary, with cruelty. The Daniels family was rotten to the core, hiding their true nature behind the facade of success and respectability. Chapter 2. The Office Tyrant. In her small office in downtown Oakland, Ebele ruled with an iron fist. She had hired Zuwena, a young, polite single mother, to replace another secretary, an older white woman named Sharon, who Ebele was ostracizing to resign on her own merits, so Ebele didn't have to just outright terminate. Zuwena was instructed to not let Sharon do anything work-related, so Sharon would sit and do nothing while Zuwena learned everything on her own. Zuwena was shy, reserved, and grateful for the job. But it didn't take long for Ebele to begin exploiting her. Ebele made her stay late, refused to pay her for extra hours, and constantly belittled her.
"Zuwena, you don't work hard enough. All you young Black women want is a nice desk job so you can sit and do nothing,"
Ebele would say, her voice sharp as a blade.
"You're a product of the public school system, so naturally you're lazy and undereducated. That's why your handwriting is horrendous. You are so unprofessional. You'll never get anywhere the way you are now."
Zuwena often went home crying, too afraid to quit and too tired to fight back. Every day, she endured more of Ebele's emotional abuse, while the rest of the office looked the other way. No one would dare cross Ebele, not when she could destroy them with a few well-placed words. Chapter 3. The Whispering Shadows. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Zuwena realized she had forgotten the keys to a house she needed to take pictures of. The clock had struck 6 p.m., and the streets were eerily empty as she returned to the office, her footsteps echoing down the deserted hallway. As she stepped inside, something felt wrong. There was an unsettling stillness in the air, a strange heaviness. In the back of the office, near Ebele's private room, a faint sound caught her attention, a low hum, almost like a chant. Curiosity got the best of her. She crept toward Ebele's office, peering inside through a crack in the door. And there she saw it. Ebele, sitting cross-legged on the floor, rocking back and forth, surrounded by candles and strange symbols drawn in a dark, sticky substance. Her eyes were closed, her face twisted in concentration, but her expression, it wasn't human. Her smile was stretched unnaturally wide, her features distorted into something monstrous. Zuwena's breath caught in her throat as she saw a small shrine behind Ebele, an altar covered in strange relics, and a figure of a horned being standing at its center. The air around Ebele crackled with an evil energy. She was no ordinary woman, she was something else, something dark. Terrified, Zuwena bolted from the office, her heart slamming in her chest. She had stumbled upon something unspeakable, something that went far beyond Ebele's cruel words and manipulations. Chapter 4. The Broker's Dark Arts. Zuwena didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, thinking about what she had seen. Ebele wasn't just a bully, she was something far worse. The next morning, she returned to work, her hands trembling as she entered the office. Ebele acted as if nothing had happened, her smile as sharp and condescending as ever.
"I need those files by noon today, Zuwena, And don't be late this time. CP time isn't allowed here. Just because you're black doesn't mean you're my family.
Ebele snapped. But Zuwena couldn't focus. Every time she looked at Ebele, she saw that twisted demonic face. She had to find out what was going on. Over the next few days, she began digging into Ebele's past, talking to people who had known her in her younger years. What she found was chilling. Ebele had a reputation for being different. People whispered that she had strange powers, that she could make people bend to her will with just a few words. Ebele's success was unnatural to most people. Some even claimed that she had made people disappear, competitors, clients, even family members who crossed her. The more Zuwena learned, the more she realized that Ebele wasn't just a ruthless businesswoman. She was a witch, a powerful one. And she used her dark magic to get whatever she wanted, and she used being a devoted church worshiper as part of her disguise. Chapter 5. The Rituals of Control. Ebele's power wasn't just in her words, it was in her rituals. She placed spells over the homes she listed, bending the will of sellers so they couldn't resist her offers. Her competitors, they didn't stand a chance. Ebele cursed them, driving them out of business with illness, accidents, and financial ruin. Zuwena's hands shook as she began to piece it all together. Ebele had been using her power to control people for years. Her husband, her children, her clients. No one was safe. She thought about going to the police. But who would believe her? Ebele was beloved in the community, a pillar of the church, a successful businesswoman. No one knew the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. Except Zuwena. Chapter 6. Secrets in the Shadows. Zuwena knew she had to be careful. Ebele was watching her more closely now, as if she could sense that Zuwena was starting to uncover her secrets. The tension in the office was suffocating, and Zuwena could feel Ebele's eyes on her at all times.
I hope you're not slacking off, Zuwena.
Ebele would say with that smile that never reached her eyes.
I expect my staff to be as dedicated as I am.
Zuwena forced a nod, but inside, her fear was growing. Ebele's power wasn't just in her manipulation. It was in something darker, something that could destroy lives. Chapter 7. The Curse of the Lapdog. At home, Kwame, Ebele's husband, lived under the same shadow. He knew what his wife was capable of, but was too terrified to confront her. He had tried twice, years ago, but the memory of what had happened both times still haunted him. Late one evening, he had argued with her about her controlling ways, but as soon as the words left his mouth, something shifted in her. Her eyes had glowed with a dangerous light, and her voice dropped to a low guttural tone.
You will not speak to me like that again,
she had said, her voice laced with a power he couldn't understand. And he hadn't. He couldn't. After that night, he was hers, completely and utterly controlled. Even now, he played the part of the tough guy in front of others. But when it came to Ebele, he was nothing more than her lapdog. Chapter 8. Behind Closed Doors. At home, Ebele's world was no different than the office. She was in complete control. Her husband, Kwame, lived in constant fear of her wrath. To the outside world, Kwame played the role of the strong, no-nonsense contractor. But behind closed doors, he was Ebele's puppet. The community had long since started calling him the lapdog behind his back. Amongst other things, he tried to ignore it, but the whispers followed him everywhere he went. One day, he showed up to church with one single front tooth in the front of his mouth. Rumors swirled that Ebele went dark, as they'd say, and knocked out all his teeth for taking his sister out to lunch. From that day on, everyone started to call him Old Tooth. Everyone knew he was no better than a lapdog. The bitter truth, Kwame, the feared contractor, who bullied his employees and clients, could barely raise his voice above a whisper when it came to his wife. Ebele's power over him was complete, and Kwame knew it. He had tried to stand up to her another night, years ago. That night, after a heated argument about her control over the family, he had shouted back at her, something he hadn't done in years. But instead of fighting back with words, Ebele had simply stared at him, her eyes glowing with a strange light that made his blood run cold.
You think you can talk to me that way?
She had whispered, her voice guttural and dangerous.
I made you, Kwame. Without me, you're nothing. You and your washed-up, useless piece of shit business.
Kwame had felt a force, something invisible but powerful, wrap around him, crushing his spirit, his will to resist. He had crumpled to his knees that night, begging her forgiveness. Since then, he had never raised his voice to her again. He lived in silent terror of the woman he had once loved, now turned into something far more sinister. Their children, spoiled and selfish, mirrored their mother's dominance. Efeji, their eldest, had inherited Ebele's ruthless nature, running his online escort business with an iron fist. He was as manipulative and cold-hearted as his mother, treating everyone around him, including his employees, like tools to be used and discarded. He had learned from the best after all. Kwame watched helplessly as Ebele pulled the strings controlling their lives, their business, and their family. He was powerless to stop it, and deep down, he knew it would only get worse. But something in the air had changed recently. Ebele had become more irritable, her temper shorter than usual, and she was always late, avoiding even her usual places of worship. Kwame didn't know why, but he sensed that the iron grip she had on their lives was loosening, if only just a little. Chapter 9. The First Step. Zuwena's fear hadn't waned, but neither had her resolve. She began to collect evidence subtly, taking photos of the strange symbols in Ebele's office when she wasn't around, and keeping notes of her bizarre behavior. Ebele's cruelty toward her had escalated since Zuwena's return that fateful night. Ebele would stare at her with those cold, calculating eyes, knowing something had shifted, but unsure of what. Zuwena started confiding in her closest friend, Masego, a young woman who attended the same church as Ebele. Masego had been part of the congregation for years, and even though she admired Ebele's accomplishments, she always found something off about her. When Zuwena finally told her the whole story, Masego's eyes widened with a mix of disbelief and fear.
"I've heard whispers,"
Masego said cautiously.
"but this is something else, Zuwena. You can't take her down alone. You need to be careful."
"I know, but I can't just let her keep destroying lives."
Zuwena replied, her voice trembling.
"I need to find a way to stop her."
Masego hesitated, but then she spoke with urgency.
"There's someone who might be able to help Aneka, a spiritual healer from Zimbabwe. She's known for uncovering hidden evil, but if you go to her, you need to be prepared for whatever comes."
Chapter 10. The Spiritual Healer. Zuwena wasted no time. She and Masego traveled to a neighboring town to meet with Aneka. The healer's home was simple, but radiated an energy Zuwena couldn't explain. Calm but powerful. Aneka, an older woman with deep, knowing eyes, welcomed them in with a warm but serious expression.
"I already know why you're here."
Aneka said without preamble, her voice low and resonant.
"The woman you face is a high-ranking witch in her coven that has been practicing the dark arts for years, feeding off the fear and weakness of those around her. But what you've uncovered is only the beginning. Her power runs deeper than you realize."
Zuwena felt a chill run down her spine.
"What do I do? How can I stop her?"
Aneka's eyes met Zuwena's, filled with both compassion and warning.
"You cannot confront her head-on, not yet. You must weaken her first. I will give you something, a protective charm to wear at all times. She won't be able to harm you directly while you wear it, but you must act carefully. Find the source of her power. She draws it from somewhere, and you need to sever her connection to it."
Zuwena's heart sank. This was more dangerous than she had ever imagined, but there was no turning back now. Aneka handed her a small amulet, carved with intricate symbols that seemed to pulse faintly in her palm.
"Be careful, child. Darkness is easily angered, and this demon has a bad temper."
Chapter 11. The Curse Begins. Armed with the protective charm, Zuwena returned to work the next day. Ebele was waiting, her eyes narrowing the moment Zuwena stepped into the office. There was a new tension between them, something unspoken yet undeniable.
"You're late."
Ebele said, her voice low and dangerous.
"I had some errands to run."
Zuwena replied, keeping her gaze steady. For the first time, she felt a sense of calm. The amulet hung from her neck beneath her blouse, a constant reminder that she was not powerless. Ebele's eyes flickered, but she said nothing more. Zuwena could sense the witch's frustration building, though. The balance of power was beginning to shift, and Ebele knew it. But Ebele wasn't one to give up her control easily. Later that afternoon, as Zuwena worked quietly at her desk, her phone rang. She picked it up, only to hear a distorted voice on the other end, speaking in a language she didn't understand. A cold shiver ran down her spine as the voice grew louder and more insistent, the words turning into guttural snarls. Then, without warning, the lights in the office flickered. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, as if the office itself was closing in around her. Zuwena stood up, her hand reaching for the amulet beneath her shirt. The phone fell silent. The lights returned to normal. But Zuwena knew one thing for certain. Ebele had sensed the challenge, and now she was playing a far more dangerous game. Chapter 12. Unearthing the Source. Zuwena knew she needed to find the source of Ebele's power. As Aneka had said, she spent every spare moment investigating Ebele's past, looking for any clue that could explain where she drew her strength from. Late one night, after hours of searching through old newspapers and records, she finally found it. Years ago, long before Ebele had become a real estate titan, she had traveled to Nigeria for what was supposed to be a business trip. But there were whispers, rumors that she had visited a powerful coven deep in the forest. Zuwena had heard about such places before, where witches traded their souls for power, offering unspeakable sacrifices. The coven was known for one thing in particular, a ritual called Akanga's Descent. It was a ritual that granted immeasurable power, but at a cost. Those who performed it became servants of the dark forces they summoned. Ebele had taken part in the ritual. Zuwena was sure of it. And now, all she needed to do was figure out how to sever the connection. Chapter 13. The Crack in the Armor. Over the next few days, Ebele's behavior became erratic. She was late to meetings, irritable, and seemed constantly distracted. Zuwena knew that the protective charm was working, but it wasn't enough. She needed to do more. One evening, Zuwena stayed late at the office, waiting until everyone else had left. She crept into Ebele's private office and began searching for any sign of the source of her power. And then she found it, hidden in a locked drawer at the bottom of her desk. It was an old leather-bound book, filled with strange symbols and dark incantations. The front Ebele's name was engraved in gold on the front cover, the sign of a high-ranking witch. As Zuwena flipped through the pages, her eyes landed on something that made her blood run cold. The ritual, the very one Ebele had performed all those years ago. But there was something else. A way to undo the spell, a reversal ritual, one that would strip Ebele of her power and sever her connection to the dark forces she had bound herself to. Chapter 14. The Reversal. The reversal ritual wasn't easy. It required something personal of Ebele's, something she valued above all else. Zuwena knew exactly what that was, the amulet Ebele always wore, a small nondescript pendant that she never took off. It was the key to her power, and without it, she would be vulnerable. Zuwena devised a plan. She would wait for the right moment, and when it came, she would take the amulet and perform the ritual, undoing everything Ebele had worked so hard to build. But as the days passed, Zuwena's nerves grew raw. Ebele was watching her closely, as if sensing that something was about to happen. Chapter 15. The Secret Meeting. Zuwena met Masego in secret, sharing what she had discovered.
I know how to stop her, but I need to get that amulet.
Zuwena explained, her voice shaking with anticipation. Masego looked worried.
That's risky, Zuwena. What if she catches you?
She won't.
Zuwena said firmly, though the fear gnawed at her.
She can't.
They formulated a plan together. They would catch Ebele in a vulnerable moment, steal the amulet, and perform the ritual in secret. But there was little room for error. Ebele's power was immense, and if they failed, the consequences would be deadly. Chapter 16. The Final Confrontation. The moment came sooner than Zuwena had expected. One afternoon, as the office quieted and the day drew to a close, Zuwena saw her opportunity. Ebele had left her office, her amulet hanging on a hook behind her desk. This was her chance. Zuwena moved quickly, grabbing the amulet and stuffing it into her bag. Her heart pounded as she hurried out of the office, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had it. Now, all she needed to do was perform the ritual. Chapter 17. The Reversal Begins. That night, under the cover of darkness, Zuwena and Masego gathered in the park where they had prepared the ritual. They set up the candles and symbols, just as the book instructed, and placed the amulet in the center of the circle. Zuwena began chanting the words, her voice trembling but growing stronger with each line.
I break the hold you cast on all. The power you wield shall rise and fall. I call the spirits to strip your reign. Your dark strength will now be drained. What once was yours is now undone. The power fades, your rule is none.
The wind picked up around them, swirling as the ritual's power grew. Chapter 18. The Witch's Wrath. Back at the office, Ebele awoke with a start. She could feel it. The pull of the ritual, the weakening of her power. A cold fury washed over her as she realized what was happening. Zuwena. She had underestimated her. Ebele stood, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light as she stormed toward the park. Her mind filled with rage. If Zuwena thought she could defeat her, she was gravely mistaken. Chapter 19. The Battle of Shadows. Zuwena's voice trembled as she continued the incantation, the ancient words tumbling from her lips faster and faster. The wind whipped violently around her and Masego, pulling at their clothes as if the very air was alive and watching. They both knew Ebele would sense the shift. There wasn't much time. Suddenly, a dark shadow loomed at the edge of the park. Zuwena's hands froze. There, standing tall and menacing, was Ebele, her face distorted with rage. Her glowing red eyes seemed to burn into Zuwena's soul. It was as if the darkness itself bowed before her. The sinister energy surrounding her was overwhelming, and even Masego took a step back, her confidence faltering. Ebele's voice was guttural and otherworldly.
You foolish little girl.
She sneered, her smile twisted into something monstrous.
Did you really think you could steal from me and survive?
Zuwena clutched the amulet tightly, knowing it was the key to finishing the ritual.
Your reign ends tonight, Ebele. I won't let you keep hurting people.
Ebele's laughter echoed through the park, chilling the air.
You're nothing without me, Zuwena. I gave you this job, this life, and now I'll take it all away.
With a flick of her wrist, Ebele sent a surge of dark energy crashing toward them. Zuwena barely managed to raise her hand in time, the protective charm glowing fiercely as it deflected the attack. The ground shook beneath their feet as Ebele's fury unleashed itself in waves. Zuwena's breath came in shallow gasps, her body trembling under the strain of holding Ebele off. But she couldn't stop now. She had to finish the ritual. She began chanting louder, her voice cutting through the storm of power swirling around them. Ebele screamed, her voice piercing the night like 1,000 needles. The power she had so carefully cultivated was slipping from her grasp, and she knew it. Her eyes blazed with hatred, her form shifting between human and something far more demonic. Black veins pulsed along her skin as she fought to maintain control, her hands contorting into claws as she reached out toward Zuwena.
You have no idea what you've unleashed.
Ebele roared.
I am far more than you can comprehend.
Masego, standing just behind Zuwena, whispered urgently.
Don't stop, you're almost there.
Zuwena forced herself to focus, her hands shaking as she gripped the amulet tighter. She closed her eyes, the words pouring from her lips faster now. The candles around them flickered wildly as the power of the ritual grew stronger, pulling the dark energy from Ebele and into the amulet. Ebele's body convulsed violently as the ritual tore away at her power. The symbols that had been etched into her skin over the years, symbols of protection, domination, and dark magic, began to fade, unraveling like loose threads. Her screams turned into guttural howls, and her once commanding presence seemed to shrink with every passing second. Chapter 20. The Fall of the Queen. Zuwena's voice reached a crescendo, the final words of the ritual escaping her lips. Just as Ebele collapsed to her knees, the wind stopped, and the air grew deathly still. For a moment, the only sound was Ebele's ragged breathing as she clutched her chest, her body trembling with weakness. The amulet in Zuwena's hand burned hot, then cracked in half, its energy spent. The connection between Ebele and the dark forces she had commanded for so long was severed. Ebele looked up, her eyes no longer glowing with the unnatural light. Instead, they were filled with shock, fear, and something Zuwena had never seen before, helplessness.
You
Ebele whispered, her voice thin and broken.
You ruined everything.
Zuwena stood tall, the fear that had once gripped her completely gone.
No, Ebele, you ruined everything. You destroyed lives and manipulated people for your own gain, but not anymore.
Ebele's face twisted with bitterness, but her power was gone. The force that had once made her invincible had left her a hollow shell. She tried to stand but stumbled, her body unable to support her. Without the magic that had sustained her, Ebele was just an ordinary woman. Masego stepped forward, her eyes filled with pity.
You've lost, Ebele. There's nothing left for you.
Ebele's lips curled into a sneer.
You think this is the end? You think you've won?
Zuwena and Masego exchanged a look, their victory beginning to sink in. But before they could respond, Ebele's eyes flicked toward the amulet, now cracked and lying in the dirt. A sinister smile spread across her face, weak but defiant.
Do you really think I didn't plan for this?
She rasped, her voice hoarse but full of malice. Zuwena froze, dread creeping into her bones. She glanced down at the broken amulet, then back at Ebele, whose grin had widened despite her weakness.
There's always a backup.
Ebele whispered, her voice barely audible, but laced with dread. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble, a deep rumble that grew louder and louder. Zuwena and Masego staggered back as cracks snaked through the earth, black smoke rising from the fissures. The candles they had used in the ritual flickered violently before being snuffed out, plunging the park into darkness. From the shadows, a low guttural growl emerged, a sound that didn't belong to any living thing. Zuwena's blood ran cold as she realized that whatever they had done, it had awoken something far worse. Ebele's laughter echoed through the night. Her body slumped on the ground, but her smile never faltered.
Good luck, Zuwena.
She rasped, her eyes glinting with satisfaction.
You'll need it.
And with that, Ebele collapsed, unconscious, but still grinning, as the dark force lurking beneath the earth stirred, its presence growing stronger by the second. Zuwena and Masego stood frozen, horror dawning on them as they realized that their battle was far from over. The end, or is it?